Mr. President, I want to apologize to you. I want to apologize to Mr. Thompson. I waited 30 years to give this speech. And the only people that were here when we dedicated the MFP was Mr. Alario, Mr. Thompson, and myself. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Alario voted to dedicate the MFP, so we could never touch it. I was one of 13 people who said, I ain't never vote to take away your ability to manage your money. And the MFP today is almost 40% of the state general fund. And because we can't touch it and we can't do anything with it, I've had to cut hospitals. When I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I passed a bill out of that House that shut down 3 hospitals in this state. And I delayed payments to our state employees, and they were trying to cut off utilities at the state capitol for non-payment of bills. And one of the main reasons that occurred is because we dedicated away our budget to the point you cannot manage this state. We're not going to hear it long from Mr. Donahue when he comes out with a budget this year. There's nothing else I can do about it because 70 and 75% of our budget is dedicated. They elect you to come manage their money, but you can't manage it. And so when this issue arose in the House, and I was watching that debate intently, this idea that this money belongs to local government is absurd. It was absurd in 1983, and it's absurd now. The people sitting in these 2 rooms have had to vote for the taxes and the cuts and everything else that's necessary to keep that money flowing. Nobody at local government had to do a thing. And somehow in this process, we've got ourselves to believing that MFP money belongs to the locals. That makes a good argument to stand up and say you're going to take away some of their money, but I heard the other argument. I can get more money per student now than I've had before because the federal money stays behind. I heard all that. But here's a fact. The minimum foundation money belongs to the people of this state and has been generated and raised by the people in these bodies. And to protect it, we cut our roads, we cut our highways. We pass an MFP formula every year that they say we're not going to spend more than 30% for administrative costs. Now, the truth of the matter is they do. And you know how they get away with it? Because they put certified teachers in the administrative building. Now, sooner or later, we're going to have to bow up. Whether you want to give them their money or more money, that's not the issue. The issue is, are we in fact going to stand up and demand we ought to manage our money better? I don't want anybody in this place to fall victim to the belief that this money belongs to anybody other than this state from the taxes it levies, from the permits and fees it charges. Nobody at the local level had to ever push a single button and take the heat for whatever we did to get that money. Not one of them. Not one. And to walk down here and tell me, as a legislator who's elected to represent about 5 parishes in this state, you can't touch what you gave me. When the federal government gives us money, they dictate how we're going to spend it. I don't like it, but they raised it. It came from their taxes. That's the way it is. And when I give somebody money and it comes from money I had to vote to raise taxes for and I had to manage, that's our money. Now, I hate to say this, but the truth is this whole issue of this education reform is occurring not only in Louisiana, but it's occurring all over this country. And when we go through that change, there are going to be changes. And when we make the changes, for God's sakes, don't make them in a fashion where you can't manage your own money. And by the way, it's probably a good time to tell you, this has been fighting since the 1800s trying to manage public education. And we've gone through change after change after change, and the public said it won't work, you can't do it, you can't do it. Let me tell you, Mr. Murray, I remember I was here when we fought the changes about whether or not black folks and white folks could go to school together. You remember that change? Fill these buildings up. You can't do that. You're going to destroy public education. When there were fights over why boys and girls were treated differently, we couldn't make those changes because you're going to destroy public education. And now you got the gall to come down here and tell me you can't make the change because the money you gave me, you don't have enough sense to manage yourself? If you want to vote to give them the money, that's your business. But for God's sakes, don't vote to give them the money because they've convinced you it's theirs. It ain't their money. And you got an obligation to manage this money. And if you think the best way to do it is to give them more, all power to you, I'm for it. But don't walk up here and tell me, and I'll congratulate Senator LaFleur. He was forthright. The first one I've heard that was forthright is not local money, he said. Direct or indirect, he said, I believe you've taken away more of their money, and he's right. But it's not their money. And I'm hoping that the press and the media and everybody else in this room, when you write these stories, that you make it clear this government is not going back into these districts and reaching out and taking those ad valorem taxes and taxes that they levied on themselves to run their schools. But we have a right to use the money that we give them to the benefit of our system that we think works best. And we have the right to choose what that is. And I will always stand up for your right to choose whatever you want to choose. But don't do it under the guise it's not ours. Now watch that debate in the House very carefully. Now watch that debate in the Education Committee real careful. And these people run around here talking about taking local money, they're wrong. We may decide how we want to spend our money differently, and that's our right. And so for that reason, I'm not going to vote for any amendment that even leads people to believe in any fashion that I'm taking somebody else's money. And I'm going to vote for everything I can. If you want to put a bill up here to repeal that crazy MFP, like I told them 30 years ago, I'll be voting for that too. Sooner or later, the people in this building have to manage the state's money, or you're going to have to dedicate the whole thing. And the only thing you deal with is what percentages each group get. Sooner or later, it's got to be done. Senator Donahue's fixing to find that out firsthand. He probably already knows it. We ought to maintain the right to manage our money. And it is the state's money, paid for by income taxes, sales taxes. We don't even have a property tax, for God's sakes. We're not going to touch their property tax. This is our money. And I feel, if you hadn't figured it out, I feel pretty strongly about it. For 30 years, I've been carrying this around in my gut. Sooner or later, I'm going to be able to show them the mistake they made. Well, I finally got there. It was a mistake then, and it's a mistake now to think it's anything other than the money you need to run your government.
Thank you, Senator Adley.